So what's important to know about learning styles and the relationship of learning styles to learning strategies? First, I guess I just said this, it's important to know to be an effective learner, sort of who you are, to be self-aware so that you can better organize your own learning. As a student, as a college student, and as an adult, period, you're really responsible for managing, organizing your own learning. You come to class and your instructor, your teacher, your professor provides a framework and provides material and provides activities, but when it comes down to it, it's really your responsibility. You can get a lot out of a class, you can get nothing out of a class. And being aware, again, of who you are as a learner will help you get more out of all of your courses. Knowing what your learning styles are means that you can build on your strengths. This inventory that I am giving you and a couple of other handouts will have ideas for maximizing your particular learning style preference. So we talked about if you're a visual learner, what are some things you can do to build on that. But it's really important, as I mentioned, to also try and stretch beyond what your comfort zone is, so that if you you prefer visual, if you feel like you're a visual learner, you can still benefit from listening practice, say, because that's going to help you develop in other areas. So it's important to try to stretch beyond what your preferences are. And then a key is to try to relate specific strategies to specific learning tasks. So depending on what you're trying to do specifically or what you're trying to learn, you can apply specific strategies to that task. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. So research into effective language learning strategies has done a couple of different things. It's looked at what good language learners do. So it's basically observational data. It's looked at a good language learner, meaning a language learner who is successful in whatever the instructional environment is, and asking that person, well, what do you do? What kinds of thoughts do you have? What kinds of things do you try? And then coming up with strategies based on what good learners say they do. The research has also looked at the relationship between the use of different strategies and language learning outcomes, to look at, okay, if you try this, does it really help you do better? And it's also looked at the relationship between learning styles and different strategies that you might use. The research says a couple of different things. First of all, we know that students who are more motivated tend to use strategies, tend to use a wider variety of strategies and tend to use them more often than students who are less motivated. Makes sense. Students at higher levels of proficiency, so students who have achieved higher levels of proficiency, tend to use more and diverse strategies. So students who are able to reach higher levels of proficiency try out lots of different things. They don't get stuck in a rut of doing things just one way. You continually try, well, let me try to do it this way, let me try to do it that way. And they're aware, they monitor themselves and constantly check in. Did that work? Did that work? And then change accordingly. This has to do with the next point then, that students of higher levels of proficiency in a language tend to use self-monitoring strategies more than students at lower levels of proficiency. So they do a better job of being aware of how they're doing and what's working and what's not working. And finally, that students' use of strategy is related to styles. It's another piece that came out from the research. Oh, and the research also shows you can learn new strategies. You don't have to do things the way you've always done them. So some of the strategies specifically that have come from the research. So one body of research that looks at what good language learners do. Here's a set of strategies that came out of a study that observed what effective language learners were doing. The first thing is that they planned their own personal goals for learning. So they didn't just show up in class to do what the instructor or the teacher told them to do, that they had their own specific goals related to their own specific interests. That good language learners take the time to plan out what they're going to focus on during a given week or day or even a little study period. So take a few minutes to sort of advance, organize themselves. And have accomplishments sort of set out in advance so that you know, okay, if you need to memorize a new set of characters in advance, you said, I'm going to get through 10 characters this week and I'm going to be able to write them out and I'm not going to have to look at the book. And so you have a specific goal then that you work towards. Good language learners try to monitor when they make mistakes. And they try to figure out why they made that mistake. Related to this, a colleague just this afternoon brought up what you do with your homework. How many of you, okay, honestly, how many of you, when you get your homework back and it's got a bunch of red on it, actually read it? You're good students. That's probably why you're here, this afternoon. So if you're paying attention to errors that you make, mistakes that you make, and trying to understand then why you made them, it's a really effective way to approach your learning. You check over what you write, practice sounds, practice the alphabet, practice writing. Good learners have regular partners. So like one of you mentioned, it could be another student. It doesn't have to be someone who's perfectly fluent in the language already, so another student can really be helpful in practicing, or with a native speaker, or with your instructor. One thing I'll talk about in just a minute is that instructors have office hours. And do you all go to your instructor's office hours? Instructors, all of your instructors have office hours, right? And so this is what it's like doing office hours. Check an email, writing some stuff, 2 hours. Students, that's the time that your instructors put aside, just for you. Really take advantage of that. You can practice with your instructor. Your instructor can give you help. Your instructor can give you an idea of what's coming up on the exam. Your instructor can give you advice on what specifically to focus on if you're not sure when you're planning sort of what you're going to do for the week. Your instructor can give you specific strategies for that material that you're working on that week in your language. I really recommend that you park it in your instructor's office hours the whole time. Don't leave. Good language learners try to relate what they know already to new material. I always try to put new vocabulary in some kind of context. So rather than memorizing, say, new vocabulary as isolated words, try to put the words in either a sentence or a phrase or a dialogue or associate it with a picture so that there's some context for that new word. And good language learners really try to regulate their emotions so that if you feel yourself getting anxious or worried or you're freaked out because you're making mistakes, really good learners take a deep breath and know that making mistakes is part of learning and it's okay. A couple of, or a few tips that have to do more with being a good student in your language courses, related to being a good language learner. but really to doing well in your language courses. First of all, foreign language courses are unlike any other courses that you take. They're cumulative, day by day. You need to study every day. So one of the worst things you can do, here's a strategy to like just never ever do. Skip class. When you go to class, be kind of checked out, and then cram right before an exam. For learning a language, that's just about the worst way you could approach your studies. It's really important to study a little bit every day. A little bit should be, and maybe this sounds like a lot, it should be an hour or 2 hours, so 1 to 2 hours outside of class for every hour that you're inside class. Does that sound like a lot, or does that sound like about what you do? How many hours do you guys study a week? Who wants to admit? A day. Nobody wants to say it? How many hours do you study a day? Some days less. I know it's hard when you've got a million other things going on, and you've got jobs, and you've got a social life, and you've got other classes. One of the best things you can do is to plan out, to put in your, if you keep a weekly calendar, a daily calendar, or you do electronically or on paper, to block out time to study outside of class and to make it regular. So if you can block out an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours every day to study the language, that cumulative work that you do will pay off tenfold, I promise you. It will more than make up for it. If you took that same 10 hours, say, that you would do over, say, 2 weeks, distributed over a bunch of days, and you crammed 10 hours right before the test, guaranteed it's going to pay off tenfold for having distributed it over time. You also might decide to break it up, not into a 2-hour sort of big session, but into smaller chunks, and have a focus for each smaller chunk. So maybe one chunk you're focusing on vocabulary, another chunk you're focusing on a new grammar construction, another one focusing on listening practice. It's really important to go to class, to go to language classes. It's important to go to all your classes, but it's extra important to go to your language classes, to actively participate. And even if you're not prepared, so you don't want to go and show up because and feel like an idiot because you didn't do the homework and you're not ready, it's so much better to go and not be prepared than it is to skip because you're not ready. So even if you're not ready, go to class, because it only hurts you if you skip. It really helps if you can get to know your classmates, get to know your instructor, to ask questions, and to go to your instructor's office hours. One thing you can do is ask your instructor, if your instructor hasn't told you in the kind of detail you'd like, exactly what the format of quizzes and exams is going to be, and then practice exactly what you're going to have to do for the exam. So find out, ask specifically. So like, okay, so it's going to be like 4 sections, and sections 1 is going to be like what? And your teacher will describe it to you, and then you can practice doing just that. That alone will really help you do better on your exams, because what if you're studying something that's not even going to be tested, or it's going to be tested in a way that is different than the way you're coming at it? Your teachers will tell you the format of the exam is never a secret. It's important to have good reasons, clear reasons for why you're in the course and why you're interested in the language. It's important to allow yourself to make mistakes, to not expect perfection from yourself. Like my mistake of being like, if I can't say it perfectly, I'm not going to say it at all. If that's your approach, then you never get practice. And practice in a language is what promotes learning. Language is a subject matter in which you learn by doing. You don't just learn about it, you learn by doing it.